everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Shifty's 49ers Talk. Today we are going to begin a new series on this channel. It's going to be a relatively short series, but a new series nonetheless. I am going to be doing my rankings for the top 20 most valuable 49ers for the upcoming 2022 season. Not necessarily the best 20 players, but the most valuable players. So certain things that I'll take into account are the positions that they play, how is our depth at that position, and also in this list, I'm actually not going to include quarterback Trey Lance. Now, I think it goes without saying that Trey Lance is probably the most valuable guy on the team. Your quarterback, 9 times out of 10, is going to be the most valuable guy. So we're not going to include Trey on this list just to make it a little bit more interesting and to give maybe someone else a chance to get on the list. But in today's video, we are going to do players from 20 through 16. The next video, 15 through 11, so on and so forth. So we'll be doing videos about once a week in this series. So over the course of the next month, which will take us very nicely into training camp and then preseason. So without further ado, let's get to player number 20 on my list. The 20th most valuable player and the first player on my list in this series is going to be wide receiver Jawan Jennings. Now, if you were to look at Jawan Jennings' stats from last year, you wouldn't be overwhelmed. You'd be like, oh, they're very, pedestrian. But I think looking at Jawan and his progress that he and his development that he had through last season, there's absolutely a reason why he's on this list, and I think he could potentially have a big time breakout season. So look at last year. He had 24 catches, which is not fantastic by any means, but 5 of those went for touchdowns. Another 15 of those went for first downs. So we're talking 20 out of 24 catches either went for a first down or a touchdown. So that just shows you just how valuable Jawan is for this team. There was a number of times in the playoffs too where we went to Jawan on big downs, let's say third down. I remember against the Cowboys, we went to Jawan a couple of times. Against the Packers, one of our second to last drive of the game, it was 3rd and 9, 3rd and 10, we went Jawan's way. So clearly he's a guy who's trusted by the coaching staff and the quarterbacks on this team to get it done when it counts the most. I think Jawan has huge value. If he were to get hurt, that would be a big loss for the offense. Next on this list at number 19 is going to be edge rusher Carrie Henderson Jr. Now, this one might be a bit of a surprise for some people, but I do want to throw a couple of numbers your way. In his career, Carrie Henderson, he's had 2 seasons where he was coached by Chris Kasarik. I think I pronounced that correctly. Each of those seasons, he's had at least 8 sacks. So with the 49ers a few years ago, he had 8.5 sacks. And then with Detroit back in 2016, he had 8 sacks. Every other year was not that great. And I think the common denominator here is the fact that when you have Carrie Henderson with Chris Kasarik, good things happen. Now, in 2020 with the 49ers, let's remember that Nick Bosa was injured for most of that year. So you can imagine this season, hopefully everyone stays healthy. But if you have Hyder, if you have Bosa, and then you have really good players in the middle too, that could be a devastating pass rush. So I really think that Hyder's value is really important. Now, look, we do have excellent depth at edge rusher. There's a bunch of guys I could name, but I think Carrie Hyder is a guy who absolutely this year could and should have 10 sacks plus if he stays healthy for all 17 games. And that's really important because this defense is predicated on the 4 guys being able to get pressure so we can have those guys sit back in our zone defense that's guided by D'Amico Ryans. Coming in then at number 18, this one might be a little bit of a shock, but I am going to go with kicker Robbie Gould. Yes, kickers are players too. So I think Robbie Gould, we know what he's done with the 49ers. We know what he's done in the playoffs, in the big moments. And of course, this team has playoff aspirations this season. He has not missed a field goal in the playoffs with the 49ers and potentially his entire career. Now let's look at last season because Robbie Gould did miss a couple of games with an injury. We'll look at it first off with Robbie Gould. So with Robbie Gould, our field goal percentages, let's say including field goals plus extra points, was 93.7%. When Robbie Gould was not out there, it was 66.7%. A massive difference. So we just can see, look, he's the number one scorer. Kickers usually are on teams when you factor in those field goals and extra points. But having a reliable kicker is so important. There was only one game last year where I felt that Robbie let us down, and that was the game at Cincinnati where we were driving down the field, end of the fourth quarter. Kittle made that ridiculous catch, and then he missed the field goal to win it. Luckily, we ended up winning the game in overtime, but beyond that, Robbie Gould is absolutely clutch. He's absolutely money. He made 39 out of 40 extra points, so he's basically money in the bank there. Plus, in the playoffs, like I'd mentioned earlier, you can count on Robbie Gould to get it done, and it's a huge advantage to have when you have a reliable kicker like Robbie Gould. Now, coming in at number 17, we have safety Talanoa Noah. Now, it's seemingly like he is going to be the starting strong safety for the 49ers this upcoming season, essentially taking the place of Jawan Jennings, who's now with the Philadelphia Eagles. So Hufanga is not necessarily given the position. I think he'll have to battle it out with newly signed George Odom, who played with the Indianapolis Colts, potentially Tarvarius Moore. I really do like what I'm seeing so far from Leon O'Neal Jr., the undrafted rookie out of Texas A&M. But for now, we're going to go with Talanoa Hufanga as the starting strong safety. I think there's a big reason why we wanted to move on from Tart. Not just because of the drop in the NFC Championship game, but I think we're looking to have someone who can make plays much more often than what Tart did. Now, what I loved about Tart's game was he was there more often than not in the right place at the right time. But just being able to force those fumbles, get those interceptions, make those big hits. I really believe the 49ers coaching staff believes in Hufanga. He can make those plays and really justify why we've moved on from Jaquiski Tartt. We really could have brought Tartt back on a really cheap one-year deal, similar to what the Eagles got him, maybe even less than that because he's familiar with us. But we decided to move on to someone else, so I think Hufanga really could bring a playmaking presence to that position, something that we haven't really had in quite a long time. If he can step up, that could be massive for our defense, and he is incredibly valuable for the team heading into this season. And last but not least, in today's video, at position 16 on this list is going to be right tackle Mike McGlinchey. So, couple of things. Mike McGlinchey, former first-round pick with us. He's been with the team for a number of years. He's had his ups and downs. I believe it was 2020. Definitely looked like he could have bulked up, added some more weight. He did that last year, but then, of course, he had the quad injury against the Arizona Cardinals in that dreadful loss at home to Colt McCoy. But anyways, with McGlinchey, a couple of numbers to look at last year. So, with McGlinchey in the roster, we actually gave up 1.86 sacks per game. Without McGlinchey, it was 2 sacks per game. So not a massive difference, but I think you also have to factor in the games where McGlinchey was in the lineup last year. We had some really tough opponents early on in the season, whereas later when he got hurt and Tom Compton filled in, there was a number of games against just really not so good opponents like the Jaguars and the Falcons, for example. But overall, I think having someone like McGlinchey who could hold down the right tackle spot is really valuable because look, we're starting Trey Lance this year, who's essentially, in terms of the amount of play time, is essentially a rookie going out there. So having that strong presence at right tackle is going to be massive for his development, and just having him next to Brunskill, those guys are of course very familiar with one another, having played together for a number of years, but being able to solidify the offensive line with a young, very young quarterback, and then of course to help get our ground game going. And that's really where McGlinchey excels, is the running, blocking. He is excellent in there. But just being able to solidify the offensive line is huge for the development of Trey Lance, and of course, huge for the success of the 49ers in 2022. And that's why Mike McGlinchey is on this list, because that position is just so valuable to what we do, and his skills are really tailored for the 49ers offense. Alrighty guys, so I really do hope that you have enjoyed this part 1 of this new series of the 20 most valuable players. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the guys I have so far on this list. About next week, sometime maybe middle of next week, I will release my players 15 through 11. It's going to be really, really fun, but I really do want to hear your guys' thoughts on my players so far. If you agree or disagree, I'm always up for a good discussion about the 49ers. And yeah, at this point, guys, I'm going to say 2 things. The butt counts, and I'm going to catch y'all on the flip side.